Hey, what's going on, everybody? Welcome to a brand new episode of Revelation Communication Current Events. Today is Thursday, March 24th, 2022. And what I want to talk about today is famine. And I'm going to be talking about three factors that I want to address that are going to lead to famine, or that could lead to famine in the very near future. The first one that I want to talk about is weather. You know, from heat waves happening at both the north and south poles of the world right now to unusual tornadoes in the southern states of America. There was a tornado, I think, in the last couple of days that ripped through New Orleans, Louisiana. My son that lives near Fort Walton and Pensacola, Florida, experienced tornadoes down there in the south. There are tropical cyclones right now hitting Southeast Africa. There's even flooding, catastrophic flooding, mind you, taking place in Queensland, New South Wales, Australia. And really, there seems to be an uptick in just unusual weather all across the world. You know, here at home, where I live in the Coachella Valley of California, we have seen some consistent high temperatures for the month of March, and even February was warmer than I really remember it being. And I've lived here for 10 years, but the weather just seems to feel so much warmer right now than it normally does. So much so that, against my better judgment, man, I even had to turn on the air conditioner because it was getting a little warm here in the house. And listen, we're just in March. On top of all this, many scientists, and I take what scientists say with a grain of salt, because many scientists believe in the Big Bang Theory, and so you got to be careful of what you're going to follow that comes out of their mouths. But many scientists have predicted this year to be a La Nina year. La Nina. Many of you probably have heard of El Nino, but without getting too textbook on the scientific definition of each, during El Nino, the warmer waters cause the Pacific jet stream to move south of its neutral position. With this shift, areas in the northern U.S. and Canada are drier and warmer than usual. But the U.S. Gulf Coast and Southeast, these periods are wetter than usual and have increased flooding. Now, during La Nina, again, La Nina, trade winds are even stronger than usual, pushing warm water toward Asia. Off the west coast of the Americas, upwelling increases, bringing cold, nutrient-rich water to the surface. These cold waters in the Pacific push the jet stream northward. This is key here. Listen in, folks. This tends to lead to drought in the southern U.S. and heavy rains and flooding in the Pacific Northwest and Canada. During a La Nina year, winter temperatures are warmer than normal in the south and cooler than normal in the north. And so that would make a little bit of sense that the warmer temperatures in the south, at least that I'm experiencing here in the Coachella Valley, coincide with a possible La Nina year that we may be experiencing. But again, I think the key factor with La Nina is that it tends to bring drought to the southern United States. And with the technical terms out of the way, again, it is forecasted to be a very dry year for the southern part of the United States. And unfortunately, we're starting to experience that right now as of this morning. Southern California, this is scary stuff, folks. Southern California is sitting at only 52% of its average yearly rainfall, with nothing in the foreseeable future to help that out. Man, I see nothing but 80s and 90s and dry weather on my weather forecast. And while Northern California is a little higher, Central California, where there is a ton of agriculture, is about the same as SoCal when it comes to its average yearly rainfall this year. And to top that off, and this is what's even more frightening, I believe, is that the snowpack in California is only at 48% of normal, which means that the spring runoffs, as we get into spring and closer to summer, aren't going to amount for a whole lot of water going back into our lakes, back into our rivers and streams, and back into our reservoirs. And look, one doesn't need an education past kindergarten to understand that water, folks, is the primary necessity to cause things to grow. Whether it's trees, whether it's bushes, whether it's shrubs, whether it's agriculture like wheat, barley, fruits, dates, nuts, vegetables, etc., water is the primary necessity at causing these things to grow. And without water, or with a severe lack of water, huge limits will be put on what can be produced and then in turn sent to the shelves of our local markets. And so listen, without water, without rain, with drought, it could lead to serious famine, dryness of the ground, the crops not getting the water that they need, the agriculture not getting the water they need. And what in turn does that do? Man, that just elevates fire season, and that's scary stuff right there too. The second thing, with an underlying third, is the cost of business. You know, before I get into the effects of the current situation between Ukraine and Russia, I wanted to share some statistics with you that are shocking to say the least. So far, since 2021, farmers in the U.S. have seen an 18% increase in the cost of their production expenses. And while there's many factors to the increase, some of them are the cost of fuel, the cost of fertilizer, the cost of feed, all seen significant increases. For example, in September of 2020, a tanker of diesel sitting on a farm that they would use to fill all their equipment, their tractors and their harvesters, etc., a tanker of fuel, of diesel fuel, in September of 2020 cost roughly $10,000 to fill up. While in the month of March 2022, a year and a half later, the cost to fill that same tanker with diesel fuel is $33,000. What was a $230 expense to fill up a tractor to work for the day on a farm now is $765. Herbicides used on farms, some have gone up 500%. And not only is fertilizer going to get harder and harder to come by, but the cost of fertilizer has nearly tripled over the last year, and I'll get to that in a moment. This has all attributed, and I'm sure y'all have seen it, to a 40% average increase on food here in the U.S., and it's worse, if you can imagine, in other parts of the world. And folks, it's only 40% right now because the retailers, your supermarkets, have lowered their margins, which means basically they're taking in less revenue to keep competing costs. They've lowered their margins at least so that we can not see that big of an increase. Now, the other factor, as I mentioned, that coincides with cost is what's going on in the world today, specifically what's going on in Russia and in Ukraine. Let me share some more statistics with you. 15%, 15% of the world's calories comes from wheat. 15% of the world's calories comes from wheat. About a third, 1/3 of that wheat comes from Russia and Ukraine. Russia has currently banned the export of wheat. It's blocked it up, and that is having an effect on it making its way to other countries. On top of that, the wheat planting season, the seeding, the sowing, if you will, should be happening right now in Russia and Ukraine. Unfortunately, that's not happening. And worldwide, there's not a whole lot of planting going on. which is going to create great risk because, again, 15% of the global calories comes from wheat. There are roughly 800 million people on Earth today that live off less than 1,200 calories a day, which is the bare minimum recommendation. That number of 800 million people living off less than 1,200 calories a day is going to increase, if not double, if not triple, in the very near future. I heard a gentleman speak about how the world is on a 90-day food supply. So basically what that means is if the world stopped producing food today, if the farmers stopped sowing and reaping, if the agriculture industry shut down, if the ability to get food was cut off today, the world would run out of food in 90 days, with the exception of those that maybe have stocked up. Sadly, the weakest and most vulnerable nations would run out of food first. Why? Because the stronger and more wealthy nations would buy their food supply to sustain themselves. And it's sad and it's unfortunate, but it's a reality. The weaker nations would run out of food first, not because they have more mouths to feed, but because stronger, more powerful, more wealthy nations are going to buy their food supply for triple, quadruple the amount that they would originally be charged, just so that they can sustain themselves. Now, this is just wheat, ladies and gentlemen, that I'm talking about. Let's talk about fertilizer. 98% of the world's ammonia is made up from natural gas, which is nitrogen-based fertilizer. Natural gas prices have doubled, and it's forecasted that they're going to go up 4 times the amount in the very near future. Prices of fertilizer have been seen to go up from $200 a ton to $1,000 a ton. What does this have to do with Russia and Ukraine? 10% of the world's phosphate and 25% of the world's potassium, which are fertilizer agents, comes out of Russia. And they have banned exports on that for at least the rest of 2022. The cost of phosphate has gone up because of this from $200 to $700, and the cost of potassium has gone from $250 to $700. And it's now getting so ridiculously expensive to grow a crop, to be a farmer, that many around the world are pulling acres of crop out of production and are growing less and less this year because of those costs. And the reality is, if things don't change in the very near future, like right now, the worldwide impact will lead to famine. Sure, we here in the West may have a little bit more on hand. We can grow a little bit more, but it will hit our shelves harder than it's currently hitting our bank accounts at some point. We may be more well off than these poor third world countries around the world, but I'm telling you folks, famine will hit the United States, our shelves will be empty, and the cost to obtain whatever is on the shelves is going to be skyrocketed tenfold from where it is today. The final factor that I want to talk about is the God factor. You know, throughout history, God has used famine as a punishment, along with many other forms, don't get me wrong, to a disobedient people. As early as Joseph in the book of Genesis being in Egypt and going through 7 years of famine, but being only spared because of the wisdom behind the 7 years of increase that preceded it. There was great famine in the days of Elijah. You may remember the story where he goes to the widow and her son, and she was getting ready to make her last cake to eat with her son so that the two of them may die afterwards because of great famine going on in the land. Jeremiah speaks of sore famine going on during the days of captivity. Ezekiel 14:13 says this, "Son of man, when the land sinneth against me, by trespassing grievously, Then will I stretch out mine hand upon it, and will break the staff of the bread thereof, and will send famine upon it, and will cut off man and beast from it. Amos spoke of famine, not of bread or of thirst, but of hearing the words of the Lord. And I'll tell you what, if we are not in that famine right now, I don't know what famine we're in. And Jesus even spoke of famines and gospels which are going to precede his second coming. And so we must take into account, along with droughts, along with wars, along with the price of doing business, that God also sends famine as a punishment because of our trespasses, because of our disobedience. And you can probably tell right now that the odds are stacked against us. It appears we're going to experience some pretty bad drought and dry land, lack of snowfall, lack of rain, at least here in the United States. Plus, the price of doing things is skyrocketing for farmers and the agriculture industry in general, which is having a double negative effect, by the way, because it's affecting the price at the store, and the farmers are cutting back because of the costs. And then finally, there's this biblical factor, right, that the Lord told us would happen. And so with that being said, I've said it before, I'm not a doomsday prepper. I don't have a bunker in my backyard. I don't have a room in my house that, can keep out, nuclear, nuclear war and stuff like that. But whatever you can buy that's maybe canned, whatever you can buy that maybe has a shelf life of 2 to 3 years, whatever you can buy that can maybe sit in your freezer for a long time, I'd recommend doing it. On top of, also properly storing rice and flour long term. My family and I have done just that, and we've invested in one of those vacuum sealer machines and have a lot of food stored that's going to last a whole lot longer because of this vacuum sealer. So if you have the ability to get one, I recommend getting one and maybe, storing some rice, storing flour, storing some things long term as you can. Whatever you have to do to ensure you and your family have at the minimum a 2 to 4 week supply of food and water, if not longer, should an event or situation take place where your access to it is completely cut off. Ladies and gentlemen, it appears that famine is on the horizon. With everything going on from a weather standpoint, with everything going on from a cost standpoint, with everything going on from a war standpoint, and certainly with what the Bible tells us, it is inevitable that famine is on the horizon, not only throughout the world, but here in the West. We need to take our minds out of the West mentality that, we have exceedingly and abundantly, because it will hit the West as well. And we need to be prepared for that, ladies and gentlemen. Listen, that's going to wrap it up today. I hope this has been some useful information to you in regards to some current events currently taking place around the world. Thank you so much for tuning in. I am Solomon Stewart with Revelation Communication Current Events.